and I say, how does ServiceNow's GlideQuery work? It doesn't know what GlideQuery is. But watch what happens when I ask the first question. Here we go, in perfect Markdown. GlideQuery is a JavaScript API. Here's a simple example. Hello, and welcome to this video. I am super excited to be presenting this to you today because what I'll be showing you is really at the edge of what's possible with ChatGPT and ServiceNow development. So recently there have been a bunch of different solutions or even products that have been released that offer the possibility to chat with some type of repository of text. So one very common solution is chat with a PDF. So you upload a PDF and then you're able to interact with that, often using the OpenAI API. But also there's been some variations of that where you can actually chat with a repository on GitHub. And so what happens behind the scenes, well, we'll look into a little bit, but basically the OpenAI API is leveraged to create embeddings of that text, which helps it search for those embeddings and find what is relevant to your question. And then it's the answer comes back in the form of those embeddings, and those are then provided to the language model as additional context to structure its answer. And so there are solutions for doing this with the GitHub repository, but of course, as a ServiceNow developer, we don't tend to work with GitHub repositories so much more in terms of update sets and files that are stored on the server. So what I wanted to see was, is there a way that we can load these files into this type of architecture so that we can also have the same capability, but in the ServiceNow context? And that's what this video is about. Now, the problem that I wanted to solve was that in my work at BitHawk as a ServiceNow developer, sometimes I'll work on a client system and they'll have an external plugin installed from the App Store, or they'll have a whole bunch of custom code or both. And I'll need to come in and make sense of that and understand what is it doing, how can I customize that without causing any problems. And often there's a lot of time that goes into that, just understanding what's going on and how can I introduce a change without breaking things. And so this is the context in which I thought this would be very useful. If I could somehow chat with that code or with the entire instance and just ask it, like I've gotten used to asking ChatGPT questions about, what's happening, what's like a high-level view, and then let's get into the details. Where should I make this change, etc. So that's the backdrop. For this tutorial, instead of looking at an entire plugin or an entire set of sort of customized script includes, I decided to focus on one out-of-box functionality, which is GlideQuery. So GlideQuery is an out-of-box API that's available on the server side, and it's basically a wrapper for the conventional Glide record. But what it does is it makes the syntax extra readable. It has like a very user-friendly way of printing errors. It has this nice feature where you can pipe the different methods like this, and it also behind the scenes make sure that the query that gets created and run is the sort of the most performant, the most optimized one. So you can't fall into the trap of having an unoptimized query. Well, I'm sure you can, but they make it easier to do the right thing, so to speak. So this is a very cool API, but I always need to look up how it works, and there's a product documentation page for it. There's also Sam here on snowadventures.com. He's written a cheat sheet, and there's also a developer post on it. However, if I go to ChatGPT and I say, how does ServiceNow's GlideQuery work? It doesn't know what GlideQuery is. So it's not going to be able to help you to solve that. So let's change that. So what code might we be able to look at to make sense of GlideQuery? So in other words, where's GlideQuery defined? So what we can do, and this is using the script SNUtils Chrome extension. I'm typing SI for script include, and we can just go to script includes like that. And what I'm interested in is, I know that there's a GlideQuery package that's been defined, see? And so I would be interested in chatting with a collection of all of these script includes. It's read only, but it's not protected, so it should load. So there you go. So this is GlideQuery defined. So all of this I want to understand. There are two, or there's one that's protected, but I think we'll be able to get enough understanding by just looking at the rest. So our goal would be to get from our instance these files and somehow pass those on to OpenAI as API, and then use that to chat with this collection of code. As usual, I've written an accompanying blog post which is available on my website, and I'll link to that in the description below the video. So before we start, it's important that you have a ServiceNow instance that you can use this with. It's important you have some way of using IPython Notebook. So this can be, if you're not familiar with this, IPython Notebook is basically just a way to use Python interactively, and it's just very user-friendly. You can use Google Colabs. I personally prefer to do it locally, as you'll see in a minute. So you need to set that up. And then we can get started. So for that, I'm going to switch to Visual Studio Code. So I've installed the Jupyter extension and the Python extension, which allows me to have this nice interface. If I've opened a file with the IPYNB, IPython Notebook extension, and you can just run some Python in these cells. They run independently, and you can get feedback on them that prints out inline. So that's quite useful. And yeah, so let's get started. So I start off importing OS is to access some of the file system methods, then PySNC, which is a Python package which allows you to interface with your ServiceNow instance through the REST APIs that are offered. And what they've done is they've made their API syntax mirror the familiar glide record syntax. So you can do gr, add query, and query, etc., just as you're familiar doing inside ServiceNow. So that's pretty cool. Then we're going to create a directory data with a script includes subdirectory. And then we're going to download the GlideQuery script includes into that directory. First, we're going to invoke the PySNC object, connect to our instance. Then we're going to invoke the glide record Python object on the sys script include table. We're going to add a query. We only want those script includes where the sys package is this ID. This is the ID of the GlideQuery. And then we're going to execute that query. I'm going to take the result, loop through that result, similar to what we would do inside of ServiceNow. And then for each result, we're going to write a script file using the name of the name property of the object in that element of the iteration. And then we're going to get the script value of that object. And we're going to write that script to the file. And then we're going to just print out when we're finished with the record. And that's it. So we're just going to hit Shift Enter, and this is going to run this cell and should give us some feedback what it's done, what it's written to the file. Sorry, it's asking for my dev instance password. So, and there, it's written these files. If we go into data, script include, we see those files have indeed been written. So cool, so far so good. Those are the files we want to analyze. You can even double check and open one, and that indeed looks like a script include. If the syntax highlighting, loads, it's even more clear. Filter load ESLint, that's all right. I'm not focused on that right now. All right, cool. So second step, import OS, which we've done, but these are, I could get rid of those if I wanted to. Actually, so here we're going to start to import some Langchain functionality. So Langchain is a Python-based framework for developing applications that use large language models. So the benefit is that they've got some, they've split things up into components that you can use and sort of combine as you want. So that's going to be very valuable for us. We also need a vector store. So a vector store is where we are going to store the embeddings. More on that later. So we are going to set up an OpenAPI key. This is what we need to use the OpenAI API. We need an ActiveLoop token. So ActiveLoop is the vector store. We're going to store our embeddings, and that's it. So let's run that. So here it's asking for our OpenAPI key. And then our ActiveLoop token. All right. And that's completed. All right, next step. So here we're going to define our embeddings. So we're going to use the OpenAI embeddings. It's not making an API call yet. And here we're going to use one of the components inside Langchain, a document loader. And then we're going to define the root there. So this is where we've put the script includes. And then we're going to loop through that directory. And then for each file, we're going to load up the file as a doc. And then as it loads, it also splits it up because there's a context window that ChatGPT or the OpenAI API has. So you cannot load in huge files. You need to split them up into smaller chunks. And then if there's an exception, then forget about it. So here, I'm not sure if this calls the OpenAI API. No, sorry, it doesn't. So this doesn't call the OpenAI API yet. This just splits up the our files into these chunks, and then we can confirm that they've been chunked here. So here we look at one of those files and we see start document, and then you see here part of the chunk. So that looks good. Then I'm going to import a text splitter. I'm going to import, so I'm going to split the document using the character text splitter. And now we're going to make the calls to OpenAI. And we're going to invoke Deep Lake. So this is the ActiveLoop API. And then we're going to use the OpenAI embeddings. So I'll be making calls to OpenAI to create those embeddings. And then it's going to add all the texts that we've created up until now. And that's it. So this should take a couple of seconds. Actually, it should complain that we've that this GlideQuery data lake already exists inside of ActiveLoop, but we'll see because I've run this before. You see, Deep Lake dataset already exists, loading from storage. That's fine. There we go. So it completed, and here it gives us some feedback that indeed all these embeddings have been stored in this data lake GlideQuery. Okay, fantastic. So then we're going to load it in. I think it might have already done that. In any case, we're going to do it here. All right, deep lake data set already exists, loading from storage. That looks fine. Then we're going to set up a retriever. So this is just one of those components that Langchain uses to basically take an input embedding, so that this will be our search term, and then compare that with the embeddings in the vector store. So now we're going to import some of the Langchain components that are used to chat with a vector store. We're going to do some customization here. So there's a general system template. So this is one of the constants that you can define within the Langchain framework. So I just put your professional ServiceNow developer, give detailed answers aimed at other programmers, start your explanations off in simple terms, respond with Markdown, include code snippets if appropriate. If you don't know the answer, simply say you don't know. So to discourage hallucinations. Then this is the general user template. So the question they'll be asking goes in here. So this is all just compiling the prompt, so to speak. This is just necessary to be able to do this. Then here we're compiling the actual prompt. Here we're picking the model. And then we do the so-called conversational retrieval chain. So that's the Langchain chain that we'll be using. We're invoking the from LLM method, passing in our model, the retriever we defined earlier, and then some of these settings we just defined for the prompt. And that's it. So that doesn't actually invoke anything yet. That step comes now. So for this to work, what we want, because we want a chat with that takes into account the history. So we ask a question, we want to be able to ask a follow-up question. And for that to work, what we need to do is after we ask the first question, we want to take the question and the answer and to send that as a prefix to the second question. So my first question is, what is GlideQuery? And then it answers, GlideQuery is this, this, and this. Then my second question should be prefaced prefaced with the first question and the first answer. So that's what we're doing here. That's why we need to pass the chat history. So we append them here, and then what this function is doing is it's just creating a function that we can easily invoke to ask questions. For every question that I ask, it's going to maintain a markdown file, and it's going to put the question there, and it's also going to write the answer there. And because I've specified in the prompt that I want markdown, it'll show up nicely in markdown format. So that's just the function. So here we can start to invoke it. So right now we see the answers.md. This is where the answer and the question and the answer are going to show up. But we can do another cool trick. We can open this in preview, close the file explorer, put that here. So right now the preview is empty, of course, but watch what happens when I ask the first question. Here we go, in perfect markdown. GlideQuery is a JavaScript API. Here's a simple example. So that's already much better. If you recall, if we just sent this to ChatGPT, it's not able to answer at all. So let's go into the weeds. How is GlideQuery implemented that allows for you to chain methods on top of each other? So that's something I was interested in. So let's see what it comes up with. So here's my question, and here's the answer. Method chaining is a common programming technique. GlideQuery each method, select order by, returns a new instance of the GlideQuery object. So that's how it accomplishes this. This is an example of method chaining. The key to chaining is that each of these methods returns a new GlideQuery object with the current state. This is evident from the code snippet. So that's already pretty cool. When I did this before recording the video, it gave me a slightly different answer. I think it was slightly more in depth, which is interesting, but this is already quite useful. So this to array method, I don't quite understand why we need that. What does it do? I've got one more question after this. To array method is a terminal function. It's useful when you need to work with the result set in a format that's easy to manipulate. All right. So here's a slight mistake because console log doesn't actually exist in ServiceNow, but this one we can copy and go to our instance, go to the background script, and then just make sure it works. And it doesn't work. Okay, so I found the mistake that ChatGPT made. Actually, to array needs to take in. Oh, I can't believe it. All right, so I found what was wrong with this snippet. So actually, the first problem is that this instance doesn't have any active users. But if we run this, as you'll see here on the right, there's the nice error feature of GlideQuery shows us that the stream to array expects a positive integer, so you cannot pass nothing like we're doing here. So this is, I would say typical ChatGPT type of mistake. Like there's a lot of usefulness here, but it's not quite correct. But even if we just put 1 or 10 or whatever, then this should work, and it does. So continuing with our last question, so this actually comes from, if you go to GlideQuery part 1. So this is a blog post by Peter Bell from ServiceNow. And there's somebody in the comments that's asking how to use regex in the GlideQuery code. And in the documentation, there's no mention of this or how to do this. So let's see if this setup can help us out here. All right. So here it's actually making a mistake, which is interesting because when I did this before the video, it gave the correct answer. But I'm not going to cut this out. This is also about seeing how the things really are and not pretending that it's better than it is. So the advice probably should be run a couple of iterations. It's not foolproof, but it's better than getting no answer, as is the case now when you use ChatGPT. So, I think I had one more. No, that's the last question. So with that, that's the end of the video. Let me know if this is useful. Let me know how you use this yourselves, or if you've got variations of this. I love hearing from viewers, and until next time. All right, one final addition to the video. After finishing this, I thought it would be easier if I could share a Google Colab notebook, because then anyone, without setting up any environment, can just open that link, clone the notebook, and get started. So let me just show you what that looks like. So here is the notebook. This is what I'll be sharing. There'll be a link in the blog post, and you can just plug in your own credentials in here, and then your own conditions for the query. So if you want to, investigate an entire application instead of just a package, or whatever you want, you can do that here and pull in the files and do it that way. So really interested to see what you guys do with this. I think this is super exciting, and I'll be exploring further. Thank you.